Okay, next item on conduct.
Item 6B, receive update on transit corridors plan parking requirements and provide feedback to staff on parking requirement amendments.
Okay, so this also has some unique firsts. So back when we had the TCP transit corridor plan going out and then to the vote for Measure N, at that time, Councilmember Salazar, Vice Mayor O'Connell, and myself were recused because of the proximity that we lived to the transit corridor plan. And at that time, we did random draw. Irene won. And so she got to serve with the other two members. So Irene gets to stay by state law. I don't know the exact section, but there's a state law that allows her to continue on in that capacity. However, now we have Marty, who also falls into the transit corridor plan. So Marty, myself, and Michael are technically recused because of living within 500 feet of the transit corridor plan. So with that said, we have to do a random draw, which now I will turn over to Mark and or Melissa in order to see who remains and those two that will have to leave the island for right now.
Right, so this is one of the more unusual aspects of state law, which results when there are recusals by a majority of the city council. And per state law, you have to have a quorum, which means 3 out of 5. And if only 2 out of 5 can participate, then state law says you have to pick only the number of individuals who will result in a quorum. So the answer is, out of the 3 individual council members who are recused, there has to be a random drawing for one more individual who will then participate for the remainder of other TCP matters, not only the one tonight, but as this comes back. So we have arranged for a random drawing. There's 30 names in here, 10 for each council member, and we're going to have the city clerk pick one of them at random. Go ahead. All right.
Councilmember Marty Medina.
So Marty will remain, and the reason there were 30, it's 10 each, and it's supposed to be more so that it's fair, right? There's not a piece of paper twisted or torn, and it gets us better odds. So I don't know, it's better than buying a lottery ticket. So Vice Mayor O'Connell will conduct the meeting, and myself and Mr. Salazar will leave the room, and then let us know when you're ready.
Good evening again, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Darcy Smith. I'm the Community and Economic Development Director. It is my pleasure to provide you with an update on the city's transit corridor plan parking requirements and to receive feedback from you tonight on the proposed parking standards. The agenda for my presentation will first start with an overview of the relevant policy background. Then I will summarize past council feedback, current observational issues, and relevant demographic data. I will present the proposed parking standards and highlight the next steps in this process. The objective for this item tonight is to receive City Council feedback on these proposed parking standards. The most important background items to highlight here are the city's general plan, the city's transit corridor plan, and those provide policy direction on the city's parking standards, which are ultimately codified in the municipal code. The general plan is the city's long-range plan that provides the community's vision for the future, and it includes policies that guide the city's decision-making to implement that vision and the long-range goals of the community. The transit corridor plan implements that general plan, and that major policy goal is to provide for new development and revitalization of the downtown and the transit corridors. It's important to point out that the San Bruno Measure N, the Economic Enhancement Initiative that was passed by the voters, implemented those major density and height changes in the transit corridor plan. And lastly, we have the housing element, which is a chapter of the general plan that specifically provides for objectives and policies related to meeting the community's housing needs and also addresses parking. The city's general plan land use element includes those guiding policies on land use. The primary objective related to the transit corridor plan is to create a new transit-oriented district in the downtown along those corridors. Ultimately, that guiding policy led to the preparation of the Transit Corridors Plan, which was adopted in 2013 and reinforced by the passage of Measure N in 2014. The vision for the Transit Corridor Plan was created by the community through extensive community engagement and feedback. The primary objective is to facilitate the transformation of the downtown and the transit corridors into urban, walkable, and mixed-use districts that are built around the transit system. And it permits a lot of development, up to 1,610 new housing units, almost 1 million square feet of office, and 240,000 square feet of new commercial space. There's a lot of information on this slide about the Transit Corridors Plan policies, but the key takeaway is that those policies, much like the downtown parking plan, supported different management strategies. Some of them, as you learn, are in the early stages of implementation. And the plan included proposed parking requirements for projects in the plan area that have been utilized and applied to projects that have been approved. They are reduced from city standards because of the anticipated reduction in parking demand on site at new development in that plan area. As I mentioned, we have the housing element, which provides guidance around housing. And that also calls for reducing parking requirements for housing near transit, but it also calls for updating the parking standards pursuant to the Transit Corridor Plan in the zoning code, and also ensuring that they are consistent with state laws, which address affordable housing. Given all of these policy documents and calling from the adoption of the parking standards, the City Council held a study session back on May 8th, 2018, to provide direction to staff. The question that was posed to staff at that point is similar to tonight's meeting objective, which is to get feedback on the standards and what should be ultimately codified in the zoning code. At that point, the Transit Corridor Plan parking standards were presented to the council, and the feedback overwhelmingly was that there was concern about incorporating those standards into the zoning code. The council commented that while they support revising the parking requirements, they want to be more conservative in the near term. They want to collect survey data, and they voice support for other parking demand supply management solutions in high impact parking areas, such as those proposed in the downtown parking management plan. Based on that feedback from council, the staff examined this issue in more detail. And one of the key data points to present to you related to parking demand is census data. And what that shows is that currently there's been an increase in household sizes since when the TCP was adopted. We now have approximately 2.9 persons per household. And with that, there was an increase in the average number of cars associated with housing units. It went up to 1.97 vehicles per occupied housing units. Also, the housing vacancy rate dropped 2.3%, and the number of households with 3, 4, or 5 or more vehicles increased 5.6%. And last, important to note that the preferred commute mode is still driving to work alone. Other key observations related to parking demand are the higher housing costs, which have also led to that increased occupancy and more vehicles. We've also had an observed increase in the number of vehicles parked in and near housing projects in the city. That's been observed throughout the city and on residential streets. So based on that issue and the relevant data, staff prepared revised parking standards for project in the TCP plan area. They differ from those originally proposed in 2013. For 3 main reasons. First of all, the TCP is still in the early stages of build-out and implementation, with some of the major parking management strategies not yet implemented, as you just heard. Second, parking utilization surveys of completed development is not available at this time. But current data and observations in the city show that parking demand is high. As I also noted, it's important for the city to be consistent with any applicable parking standards in state law. So the proposed parking standards that you see before you tonight respond to that overarching policy concern that if parking is inadequate in new development, especially in the transit corridor plan area, that it could impact neighborhood parking and the residents' quality of life. Those impacts include spillover parking onto nearby residential streets and congestion due to drivers circulating to find limited available parking. So before you are the revised residential standards. These differ slightly from the city standards as you see here for apartments and condominiums. But the basic standard is that for one-bedroom units, the proposed requirement is 1 stall. And for 2 or more bedroom units, the requirement would be 2 stalls. In addition, there would be a guest parking requirement. These parking standards were selected primarily because they allow for 1 stall per bedroom, and they're consistent with state law, which applies to any project that has on-site affordable units, which is what we typically see in the transit corridor plan area. Last, the parking standards would stipulate that for all apartments or condominiums, that tandem parking or mechanical or automated parking would be permitted. That would be examined in more detail. And for those new developments, through conditions of approval, unbundled parking, which is charging for parking separately than through the rental agreement or the condominium sale agreement, that would be prohibited. And these new developments would also be prohibited from participating in any new residential parking permit programs if they're in an area adjacent to those. The revised commercial standards would merely revert to the city standards. The transit corridor plan for some commercial uses varies significantly from the city standards, and the maximum reduction that would be allowed would be 10%. That would require a parking management plan and a transportation demand management plan to be prepared for the project, which would be prepared by a consultant who would have to present evidence that they could actually achieve the 10% reduction in demand through things like transit passes or other measures. So the recommended next steps are that these zoning codes be adopted, zoning code amendments be adopted as soon as possible. Ideally, it will be brought back before you in the spring for adoption. And as a key follow-up item, the parking utilization surveys would need to be completed once projects in the TCP area are completed. And that would allow staff to be better informed about actual utilization. As you saw in the downtown, that parking utilization data is extremely key to guiding decisions related to parking. And without it, we have a lot less to rely on for accuracy, especially in a plan area in the early stages. So staff recommends reviewing those every few years. It's important to know we would work with the pipeline projects. And the overall goal would be to achieve the vision of the TCP over a longer time range. I got some more. No, thanks. So that concludes my presentation, and I look forward to your feedback and discussion and questions.
Okay. Darcy, I hate to say this, but could you repeat the last little bit? We were all
Oh,
concerned
yeah.
about you
Hold on.
choking, so we weren't,
Okay.
I personally wasn't listening that clearly.
So the next steps.
Yes.
Okay. So ultimately, with your feedback, we will finalize the zoning code amendments and bring them back before you in the spring. But what's really critical, as you heard tonight and through the downtown parking management plan, is to collect the survey data. We anticipate doing that for completed projects. And that would really inform staff's analysis of the success or sort of the right fit of those parking requirements. Every community is different, and I think survey data is extremely beneficial to understand sort of how we as a city see parking demand, as you saw in the downtown. So in the near term, we would work with the developers of pipeline projects. We have 2 main projects. We have informed them to strive to meet the standards, and we will continue to work with them to examine options to increasing the parking supply. But I want to emphasize that the city is committed to supporting development in the TCP to achieve the long-range vision, but the plan has a very long range, and we're just in the beginning stages, so staff thinks this is an optimal standard. These are optimal standards to start with. Last, you're requested tonight to discuss this topic in more detail and provide feedback. And again, the goal is to get your feedback to finalize the zoning code amendments so we can bring them back before you for action to codify them as quickly as possible. That would be at a public hearing, both first at the Planning Commission and then here before council. And that concludes my report, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you for repeating that. Are there any questions from council or comments?
I have no questions, but I would like to hear if there are any speaker cards.
Okay. Melissa, are there any speaker cards?
Yes, there are two. The first speaker is Suresh Gandhi.
Would you step up to the podium, please? Thank you.
Well, Honorable Mayor and member of the City Council, I know Mr. Mayor is not here, so I just talk to you. So good evening. My name is Suresh Gandhi, and I'm from 501 Eastern Avenue. I understand the city is trying to make some changes as far as the transit corridor parking is concerned. And I am one of the person who has a project in pipeline, and we are almost working with the city for 3 years. And we have gone through many changes and meetings with the city, and it's very difficult for anybody who has spent this much time, this much energy, and this much money to change anything at this stage. We are almost on the 9th inning. We have done everything we could do to do the project. It's now in the city's hand to give us the planning commission and the city council meeting. So I think it's totally unreasonable for anybody to come back and say, oh, you do these changes now. That would not be good. I don't think that would go well with developers or anybody else, in the future. So that's my request. Any changes you want to do, that's fine. Go ahead and do it. Make a proper announcement, meetings, and then do it in the future. But don't do it retroactively. That's my one plea there. And I can tell you a lot of story about how this project came about, but I don't think this is the stage here. But I tell you, this particular project that I'm involved in is sitting in the city for 10 years, and all the zoning restrictions and all the problems that's going on, in spite of all this real estate boom in the Bay Area, this lot has been vacant and become a, habitat for people that should not be there, So we have taken a lot of steps to create a vibrant property there, make a housing. As you can see from the chart, the city has only 2.3% vacancy rate, which is almost like, there is no room available. Rents are going up, and we are trying to create these things. And city standard is made, when the vision was done, it was made with a reason why you want to give this kind of a flexibility to developer. And we have met every standard that was there. So my real concern is not to make any changes to the project. They're already pipeline and waiting for your approval, That's what I would say that. I had a couple of questions about the study, and the study is done. It shows that there are some people have 3, 4, 5 parkings, and I don't know where that's coming from, but I think that's really an issue that's creating problem. If you look at the study, the people with 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom, that almost wipes it out. There is a figure on that study, and on a 1 bedroom, there is a 1% decrease, and the 2 car, there is increase. So it just wipes it out. There is no increase there. All the increase is based on the people who have 3, 4 parking, which I think is a real issue you have to deal with, And also, if you are going to make the changes, just like you are doing on the residential for housing, that if the house is more than 2,800 square foot, you require the 3rd parking. I think you should do the same way on the apartment units. If the apartment unit is more than certain amount, 1,200 or something like that, then you require that, because otherwise in 1,000 square foot, there is not going to be that many people to start with. So there won't be any issue with the parking, whatever requirement is there, So I think they will meet the requirement. So I think if you are going to make the changes, look at the size and look at the criteria that you apply to the housing, and then make the changes. That's will be my thinking.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Your time is up.
Thank you.
I was looking for a light.
Alan
Is there any-
Kuhn. Oh, I'm sorry?
Any more?
Yes, one more, Alan Kuhn.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Alan Kuhn, architect for the project Mr. Gandhi had just discussed. I think one of the things Mr. Gandhi is concerned about, and any other developer would be worried about at this juncture, who has had a project that's been in process for a number of years, as we have, 2 years, hundreds of hours of our time designing a fine project with city staff, other design professionals. We've got grading and drainage plans. So the uncertainty that we have that if the council adopts new parking standards and they apply to our project or any other project that's already, any other application that's already in process, that it would be unfair to impose greater parking requirements than those that are part of our design right now. So I know that part of what you want to do tonight and later is to provide feedback to staff regarding the, ultimately, I would think, the adoption of new parking standards in that district, the transit corridor, that the new regulations or the new standards don't apply to projects that have been underway for a certain period of time. Understand that we've been through the community meetings, we've been through architectural review, we've had a unanimous approval on the first review, we've had peer review, we've had the second architectural committee review, unanimous decision on that one as well. And so we've come this far, and it would be almost impossible to redesign the project should additional parking requirements be imposed on this project, this 9-unit project, 500 Sylvan Avenue. So I'd just like you to consider that.
Thank you for your comments. Is any member of the public want to make any comments? Okay, seeing none, I will bring it back to council. Are there any comments or questions? Oh, I'm sorry, before I do that, Darcy, can you clarify where the survey came from that shows the 70% people are driving alone and the 25% increase in houses with cars 3 to 5 or more?
Yes, that's from the U.S. Census, which is typically done every 10 years, as you know, but they do smaller sample surveys every year, and it's all available online.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments? Or, Marty?
I was wondering if staff could provide some response of how these new guidelines will affect projects that are in the pipeline? Just to kind of, somebody could give us some feedback on that.
Sure. So certainly there are a number of projects in the pipeline that we called out in the report. Similar to development impact fees, staff will sit down with each of those developers, and we certainly understand that pipeline projects, some pipeline projects may be impacted, and so we would look to sit down and have an individual conversation with each developer, and so we will commit to doing that.
Okay. Did you want to make any more comments?
So it's been reported and that council did address this issue in a study session on May 8th last year. And I think the public, I think Mr. Robert here in front was there, and that was about it. So I want to thank you for your continued attendance. But this is something that the council heard and recommended. So I appreciate this much needed revision as we're moving into maybe another development boom. It has been slow, but it's progress, and things have changed in the last couple years of who would imagine where Uber would be today and the impact that is having on our residents as people at the airport are getting dropped off. And not only being dropped off, sometimes they're just finding ways to leave their cars in our neighborhoods. And it's reaching a critical point. And I think at a time it was probably an incentive to get the development going in our city, but the impact that it's having to our residents, it's almost overwhelming. And I'm in favor of this revision. I believe that as in our development impact fees study, that developers could continue discussing and negotiating with staff to work something out. But this is something that the parking is just too much. The problem, it's growing and it's getting worse and worse, and it's going to continue getting worse as people are not going to easily give up their cars. The comment I would have on this survey data is that our first main project is going to, I heard today from our mayor that'll be later in this quarter, that we'll start getting an opening at Aperture there. However, it'll take a number of months to kind of get a baseline of what that impact to the neighborhoods are. And I can tell you right now, in my neighborhood, which is within 500 feet of Aperture, just two more cars in my neighborhood, and people will have to pretty much be a domino effect as you keep on pushing people further and further away from the convenience of being able to park near their home. So this is something that I'm really pleased that the council is taking forward and staff has been able to respond to. So I'm hoping that we can work this out, and this increase is needed. And my last question on the zoning code update: are we only looking at this parking change? Are we also anticipating getting some zoning updates on allowed uses in our downtown? I've heard from some business owners, like, how many more barber shops can we have on our downtown? How many more nail salons could we have in our downtown? And so just if that's also something that's going to be looked at, so we can kind of look at it all at once, or is it something that will be taking longer to deal with? That's my question.
Okay, can we hold on to that till we finish this part of the parking? Or
If staff doesn't have a problem answering the question, I'd like to have an answer.
If they're prepared to say.
Our goal tonight was to get feedback to bring this specific zoning code amendment back to you in the spring, to be expeditious with that, and the larger zoning code update, especially implementation of the transit corridor plan and other items that will come later, and it would be reviewed at a later date.
Okay, thank you.
To the chair, Councilmember Medina always reminds me of this excited, I get where you're coming from, and I love your passion, so I appreciate the additional questions, but I think I'm excited to focus on the parking issues, and I want to get this behind us and moving forward with changes. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate and I'm glad that the requirement is to prohibit unbundled parking. I'm not interested in seeing developments come in where we're selling this unit, and if you want parking, it's an additional fee, because we know what happens. I can't afford my rent, I can't afford additional parking, so I'll just park my car on the street. There's some great things out there for mechanical parking, so all those great wows that we can include in new development is exciting, and I think is definitely needed. So I too am in favor. I mean, look at this, the census that you provided us, 70.2% people drive to work. Probably in the Bay Area, that percentage is much greater than that. Households with 3, 4, or 5 vehicles has increased by 25%. I mean, we see it every single day. We drive around and we see the vehicles that are on the streets. residents simply can't afford it. And so years ago, when one family purchased a home and they all moved in, well, now it's two people purchasing a home together and moving in. And so we see that moving into condos, and they are never able to buy that home. So there they are raising their family with, it's a husband and wife, and before you know it's kids, and before you know it, the kids are teenagers, and now we've got 4 and 5 vehicles. So these parking changes are definitely required and needed, so I'm very excited to see that. So thank you.
I was here when we did the transit quarter plan. There was a lot of input from the community. There was a lot of support, obviously, since it was voted for. Unfortunately, times have changed slightly. The cost of housing has risen so much, as both of my colleagues have said. 2 or 3 families are in the same house. There's 5 cars or 6 cars. Even in my own house, we raised 3 kids. You would think, okay, they will leave. No, they're all there, and they all drive, and they all have cars. And they all have to drive to work because of where they work. So unfortunately, that has an impact on the new developments. It's almost like you're being punished in a way because of the residential parking difficulties. And that, of course, is not our intention. And we have to take care of the residents that are here, and we have to be mindful of what the added impacts that come on top of what is already there. So I understand your need for certainty, and I know staff is hearing us right now that they will do everything they can for every project that is in the pipeline, that has been there and is making a good faith effort to do what we were bringing forward. So I know you will be, not everyone's going to be happy with this, but I know it'll come to a good resolution, and that staff will take care of all of that. I too am looking forward to what our new development, what surveys are going to show when our new developments get residents, and if they actually need fewer parking spaces because they are using public transit. So that's some information that we could all use. Having said all those things, don't forget that we are having a meeting tomorrow about parking. It is here at the Senior Center at 6 o'clock. It is not for council per se. It is for the residents and staff to listen to each other and to come up with some solutions, some mutual solutions. So do remember that. And with that, do you need a vote? No. Okay. Any other last-minute comments? All right. Having said that, the mayor and Councilmember Salazar may come back.